As often happens with great philosophers, Hayek was not particularly good with personal finance. In 1969, he was looking for work, and he took a job with the University of Salzburg. He also sold the university his personal library. He was closer to his wife's family in Vienna, but the years in Salzburg were somewhat disappointing for Hayek. The retirement home in which Friedrich and Helena lived here in Salzburg was a room between a retired fireman and a retired blacksmith. Friedrich was intellectually isolated here in Salzburg. In a summer interview in 1974, right before receiving notification that he had won the Nobel Prize, Hayek was asked if his work was well known in Salzburg and if there was a great deal of interest in his work and his lectures here in Salzburg. He replied that it wasn't very well known, and aside from the students that came to his classes, there wasn't much interest in his work. The University of Salzburg could not bestow doctorates, at least not in the social sciences. And so there were very few serious students in economics here in Salzburg. From Hayek's perspective, the early 70s were the worst of times. Inflation was rampant throughout the West. England seemed to be on the verge of social and economic collapse. America was imposing wage and price controls. The Soviet Union seemed to be at the summit of its power. However, at the end of the 70s, the shining city on the hill was about to be restored with the elections of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. The end of the 19th century, Karl Menger's time, was a time of kaisers and kings. It was a society that had become stagnant. The Habsburgs had thought they had stopped history. But as we know, change inevitably comes. Once again reached a stage where it is more important to clear away the obstacles with which human folly has encumbered our path, and to release the creative energy of individuals than to devise further machinery for guiding and directing them, to create conditions favorable to progress rather than to plan progress. Or, to express it differently, planning and competition can be combined only by planning for competition, but not by planning against competition. The Austrian economists put an individual's desires and needs at the center of economics, and that price would be the best guidepost for the economic man. That something was worth what someone was willing to pay for it. And if you began to fix prices, you also had to begin fixing man's desires and his needs. And that leads down the road to serfdom. Precisely what the price system does under competition is it enables entrepreneurs, by watching the movement of comparatively few prices, as an engineer watches the hands of a few dials, to adjust their activities to those of their fellows. The important point here is that the price system will fulfill this function only if competition prevails. That is, if the individual producer has to adapt himself to price changes and cannot control them. Though in the short run, the price we have to pay for variety and freedom of choice may sometimes be high, in the long run, even material progress will depend on this very variety, because we can never predict from which of the many forms in which a good or service can be provided, something better may develop. The masses have come to believe that they have reached their high standard of material wealth because they have pulled down the wealthy. But there's little reason to believe that they would enjoy their standard of living if they were not allowed to enjoy their wealth. Every material comfort that the masses takes for granted began initially as the luxury of the privileged few. But it was through their application of capital that industry was able to fashion these goods in a way that it became affordable to the masses. And the man of independent means has an even greater role in the fields of thought and opinion, of tastes and beliefs, in preserving art, culture, and religion. This is Friedrich von Hayek's personal copy of Russell Kirk's The Conservative Mind. It's signed on the inside and dated May 14th, 1953. He read this book, certainly. However, there are no annotations apparent, and it is certainly apparent by Hayek's later work that he never grasped the idea that Russell was attempting by reclaiming the term conservative. Hayek considered himself, with Tocqueville and Burke, as classical liberals. Liberalism, he writes,
is concerned mainly with limiting the coercive powers of all government. The dogmatic Democrat knows only one limit to government, the current majority opinion. Liberalism is a doctrine about what the law ought to be. Democracy, a doctrine about the manner of determining what the law will be. It accepts majority rule as a method of deciding, but not as an authority for what the decision ought to be.
Hayek made the argument that conservatives were afraid of all change, and of course that's not true, particularly in Hayek's field of economics. Conservatives believe in ordered markets just as we believe in ordered liberty, that there is something inside of man that always wants to emancipate itself from tradition, to emancipate itself from traditional forms in particular. The conservatives believe that there needs to be experimentation, particularly in the market, but that the market needs to be an ordered market to allow for freedom. When one reads most of Hayek's writings, a conservative finds a very conservative defense of tradition, convention, and the continuity of an evolving society.
What Hayek never seemed to grasp is that there is an enduring moral order, a normative truth about man, that this enduring moral order was made for man, and man was made for it, and that when we depart too far from this order, it only ends in disaster, not only for the individual, but for society at large.
Yet the road may be long. It is one on which it becomes more difficult to turn back as one advances. If in the long run we are the makers of our own fate, in the short run we are the captives of the ideas we have created. Only if we recognize the danger in time can we hope to avert it.